Hey guys, Rudi here with another CSSE1001 tutorial. This week we're going to be looking at the week 7 tutorials solutions, or my solution, my approach to the problem anyway. And this week is on class design, or just classes in general, really. And so we've got this initial code here, and I'm actually going to use this to sort of get into a quick overview of what a class is. Okay, so we can see when let's just move that over to the side. We can see when we set up our class, we've got the class keyword, the name of the class, in this case student, and then we want this class to be a type of object. Now, we'll get more into what this object here means in the next week when we start talking about inheritance in classes. But for now, you can basically know that Python has a very basic sort of top level thing called an object. It's very generic. And we want our student class to be a type of object. So that's what this notation is about. Every class we set up an init method, right? So this is 2 underscores, init 2 underscores, and that stands for initialize, right? And this is basically how we set up a particular type of student, right? So let's actually just make an instance of the student class. So let's make a Fred. Okay, so we call it by making cStudent, because that's what our thing is called. And then now in our initialize method, we see there's this thing self and then name. Now you don't have to worry too much about the self for now. All we need to know is that there is a name, right? And let's call him Fred. Excuse me. Okay, so now we've got this guy Fred, this variable. Cool, main student object, right? So it's a type of student. This is pretty unreadable and doesn't really help us too much, but we know that we've got this Fred guy there, right? So let's go back over here. Now, these things here, right? We've got these def statements. They're inside our class though. So this init and this get name are what are actually known as methods, right? For Python terminology. They're a student method. Basically, you can sort of think of them in a sense as functions that belong to the student class. Okay, and so we can see over here, right? If I go to Fred, and he has a get name method. So if we go dot get name, and we call that, and it doesn't. The only thing it's passing is itself, so we don't need to give it anything here. And we can see that we get our name back, right? So what happened there? Well, when we set up our init method, we passed in a name, and then we assigned that name to this self._name. Okay. So probably the main bit of confusion here is what's this self guy, right? That's probably the main thing we need to discuss here. So this class student and this stuff we set up here is, you can think of it almost as a blueprint for a student, right? Don't think of it as an actual student. This is a design for a student. So when we go over here and we make a specific student Fred, it's saying, cool, here's the blueprints. I'm going to tell you how to make one. And then you're going to have your own actual student Fred. Okay? So that's what this self sort of parameter is. It's saying, cool, this is the specific instance of a student that you're talking about. And by convention, we use self in Python, right? So it's saying, cool, you're setting up a student. This is the particular student you're talking about. And so we can use this dot notation, self dot something, to signify something that belongs to this particular student. Right? So just as an example, if I make another student, George, probably should have used something easier to type out, but whatever, George. Oh, what have I done? Oh, I spelled student wrong. Cool, I made Fred and George. So we can see that Fred dot get name and George dot get name give us different things, right? Because this dot get name, these dot elements of the object belong to the individual instances of the object. And so that's sort of what we're using this self for. And so that's why when we go here, we go to get name, we pass it a self. And that's basically saying, well, you want to get a student's name right, but which student's name, which instance of the student are you talking about? And so by calling Fred dot get name, right, we're saying, we want to know Fred's name, right? And that's what the self class is. That's what the self term is. Another way you can think about this potentially is all this sort of stuff belongs to the student class, right? But if you try and call something like student.getName, it's going to give you an error, right? Missing positional argument self. It's saying, cool, you're going student.getName. This is a blueprint, so I know that the student has a name, but which student are you talking about, right? And so we generally want to use this notation, but the other thing we can do is we can sort of explicitly set it up kind of how we would normally expect something like this to work, right? So it's got a get name and self. So who was our student that we were passing into it? Well, let's pass in Fred. And we can see that that is working the exact same way as that, right? So using this Fred.getName is sort of a shorthand way of calling student and passing Fred in as the self variable, okay? So you really want to get used to using this notation here. It's a lot cleaner. It makes a lot more sense because it's sort of a similar to the way that when we've used strings, right, we can do something like the isDigit method, or dot partition, stuff like that. Those are methods of the string class. So yeah, that's sort of the intro, the overview of student, and a bit of a look into what this self guy is talking about. So that was a bit in depth, but with all that out of the way, let's actually look at what the actual tutors this week. So what have we got here? In this tutorial, we will write a simple program which keeps track of students and the courses they take. Here's our starting point. I just copy pasted that straight in. Modify this class so that it also stores the student number and degree program as a string. Add methods getStudentNum and getDegree, which retrieve this information, and a method setDegree. Okay, cool. So a really common practice when setting up a class is to pass in these dot name variables or whatever, these dot variables into your class initially, and then to use getName, get methods, I suppose would be the way of wording it, to get them out. So see, when we have Fred, we can technically do this, and it'll give us the name back. But this is a bad practice, because particularly once we get into future coding languages and from after CSSE1001, this sort of stuff won't work anymore, and you'll really want to be using this get name sort of method notation to get your classes back, get the information back out of your classes. So what are we writing here? We're writing a get. I've got my def. Get student num. Now remember, we need to know whose student number we're going to be getting back, so we pass the self variable in. Okay, and the other one we wanted to write there was what? Get degree. Again, whose degree? Which instance of student? So we pass in the self, which retrieve this information, and a method setDegree, which changes the student's degree. Cool. So this one we're going to pass in self, and we'll come back to this one in a second. Let's just pass on that. So looking at this get student num first. Well, firstly, when we make our student, he needs to have a student number, right? So let's actually add something up here to the constructor function, to the init function, student number, right? So now when we make a student, we have to pass in the name and the student number. Now we should also probably have it pass in a degree. So oh yeah, cool. So if we look at the example over here, it's passing in a name, a student number, and a degree. So let's use that. And degree. Cool. Now we don't want to just pass these guys in and then not store them in the class, right? We want our specific instance of this student to store those, right? So self._snum. Now the underscore here is once again a convention thing. We use this dot underscore to symbolize that this name guy belongs to the student, and also that he's sort of private, right? We sort of want to keep this guy hidden inside our class, and we only want to use get name to get it out. Again, this is sort of a good structural design, and it makes it a lot easier sort of to work with, particularly when you come into someone else's class that you don't know too much about, and you just go, oh cool, I can go dot get name and I'll get my name out. I don't need to worry too much about this underscore notation or anything like that. It's a lot easier to work with, and it's a better practice. And yeah, so we're going to store these three guys. Now get student number. Well, we just want to get that value out, so return. Now we can't just do this, right? Because whose snum are we talking about, right? We passed in this self variable. It's not going to know who snum is, so self._student number, right? Now we know that when we created the particular instance of student, we associated a student number with it. So we know that this should give us back the guy we passed in. And let's also just extend that to the get degree. Okay, cool. So let's make a new student. Let's make another Fred now. Student. Now we want to pass him Fred. Now we also need to give him a student number now. So I'm lazy, so 1. And a degree. So what do we? BE. That's shorter than BM Tech. And cool, no errors because we passed in all 3 things. If we tried to make it using the old style now, C Python, whoops, okay, that's a different error. Right? There we go, that's the one I was looking for. Init, missing 2 required arguments, right? So we can't just call it like that anymore because it's expecting 3 things now. So back to this Fred student method we've got here, right? So we should be able to still go Fred.getName. Cool. Now let's see what this get student number does. Awesome. And Fred.getDegree. Awesome, BE. So again, because we're passing in this self by using Fred dot and using it as a method of this particular instance, we don't need to put anything in these brackets because the self is sort of it's contained by using Fred dot. If we were to try and access this using this sort of student global sort of class way of accessing the functions, and then we passed in Fred, then we can get Fred degree that way as well. But again, I highly encourage you to try and get into this notation. It's very common pretty much everywhere. Like think about all those string methods we used, list, dot, append, stuff like that, right? It's that kind of thing. So we want to get away from this and into moving into using this kind of notation. Cool. So that being said, what was the other one we had to do? Set degree. Okay. So in this case, we want to set the degree, right? We want to try and change what this self._degree was initially. So we're probably going to have to pass in a new degree, right? We can't just set it. Cool, just set it, right? We will set it to what, right? We need to know what we're setting it to. So self._degree takes on that new degree we passed in, and we're not actually going to have to return anything here, right? Because we're not getting anything back. We're just setting something with Fred. So again, just accessing this _degree variable of the particular student instance, and we're just overriding it. And this getters, we just typically call these getters and setters. A really common way, once again, of changing and accessing the variables you set up within your class. So let's just once again make another Fred, and now if we go Fred.get degree, we get his degree. Now this time what am I doing? Let's set Fred's degree to be something else. So Fred's had a bit of a change of heart, not feeling the BE anymore, and he's gonna go over to a BA. Cool, we didn't get anything back there because we're not returning anything. But now if we try and get his degree again, we've got BA now, okay? It's just because we've changed that inner variable here, particularly the one that belonged only specifically to Fred, because that's that self we keep talking about. Awesome. Cool, so that's the first part through. Why might it be inappropriate to add a set student number which modifies the student number? Let's just have a bit of a think about this. And this is more of a real world kind of question than as to a Python kind of question. But think about it. You come to UQ, right? You don't get a new student number every year. You don't get to change your student number willy-nilly. It's a unique identifier. So we typically, well, not typically, but in this case, we're not going to actually add a set student number because we don't want to be able to override it. It should be you set it up once. That's your student number for life. That's why we're not bothering to put in a set student number. Sorry, just getting some water. Okay. You ever try to talk for what's it been, 10 minutes? Just takes it out of you. Okay, so what else have we got here? Add the following methods. For our purpose, we will assume that the student's name is composed of 2 names. Okay, cool. Get first name, which returns the student's first name, and get last name, which returns the student's surname, Michael Palin. Okay. Cool. So we can see that it's going to be space separated, and it's going to be 2 names, so one on either side. So anyone who knows me or has watched the previous videos will know that I am going to use the string.partition method here. Now, there's sort of actually two approaches you can take in this case, right? At the moment, we're just storing the entire name in a self._name variable. So let's try using that approach for the moment, and then maybe I'll show us something else after that. So what's the method we're trying to get? Get first name. Again, self, because whose name are we getting? Now, what we could do is use self._name and use the .partition method, right? Over a space. Now, for anyone who's unfamiliar with this method, what it does is it takes everything, it searches the string until it finds the first instance of whatever's in here, so a space, and then takes everything to the left of that, puts that in your first variable. Whatever's in the middle will become a space. So I'm going to call that variable space for the moment. And then last, whatever's on the other side will be last. Okay. Now we don't need this space, so I'm going to replace that with an underscore because yeah, we're not going to use it. So let's just call it underscore. And now we've got this partition here. Now, which one of these do we only care about? We only care about this first variable, right? So yeah, sweet. There we go. This should be giving us back our first name. Let's try that again. So let's set up a new student, Fred Weasley. Please don't sue me, Harry Potter people. And now let's try using Fred dot get first name. Cool, we got our Fred back, right? Because it partitioned. Let's break this down. Fred Weasley dot partition over a space. Cool, it's broken up into three things. Fred, so that's the guy we got back, right? Then a space, and then everything after the Fred. So you can see that this here is going to be our last name, right? Because following our convention, we have a space and then only the last name. So we could set up our last name just like this, right? Except this time we're going to be returning last instead. So we've got this this sort of duplication happening here. So one other thing we could do is when we initially set up the name, we could actually do this step up in our initialize, right? Because at the moment we're not able to, we don't want to be able to sort of override the student's name. So instead of doing this, I'm actually going to try and do this slightly differently. So I'm not going to store the name up here. Instead, let's use this code up in our constructor function, right? Because we're only going to set the person's name once. So stuff that we only do once at the beginning is perfectly acceptable to put it in the init method. And indeed, it's probably the better way of doing it. So what are we partitioning over now? We're partitioning over name, okay? And what do we want to set? We want to set first and last to be name. And then let's just go down under here. And let's set a self._, let's set an underscore first name. Set that to be first. Self._, last name. Set that to be last. Okay, awesome. So now we've got these first name and last name variables instead of this initial name we used here. So what we can do is we can get rid of this down here. And instead of returning first, let's return self._ first name, right? Because that's what we saved up here. And return self._ last name. Okay. Now we no longer have a name method. So let's just change this, right? Because what's it going to be? It's going to be self._ first name plus a space and self._ last name. Cool. I went through that fairly without showing too many examples. So let's actually just go over here and check out what's happening now. So let's make this Fred Weasley character. Okay, now let's just sort of hack into the class a little bit and just look directly at this first name variable we've got. Fred, awesome. Which means if we try and use our get first name method, we get, oh my, good heavens, what have I done? Get first name. I wrote the same function name twice. That is not what you want. Although actually, while we're here, let's just have a look at this. So see how I wrote two methods, get first name and get first name. But what actually happened here? We got the last name back. So see, Python sort of just read down this sequentially. and went, oh, cool, I've got something called get first name. And then it went, oh, cool, I've got something called get first name, and just completely overwrote this, right? Because it just went, oh, cool, I've got something called get first name, and I don't care about what it was before, I'm just overriding it. So, you know, good lessons. Good to know what happens if we do something really stupid. So let's go back here. Fred dot get first name. Fred. Cool. Fred dot get last name should access that last name variable we set up. Awesome. So that's just accessing these two guys after the partition. And let's still check that our get name does what it should be doing. So get name. Fred Weasley. Cool. Because we put the first name, space, last name. Just stuck it all together. Something to note here is we typically use this underscore for these sort of private variables like I was talking about. And these guys here, get name, get student name, these methods which were intended to be used by anyone using the class. So if someone comes along, they want to know the name, they should be able to just put that in, right? We don't underscore those guys. So that's sort of the notation I'm sticking with here. Okay, cool. Let's see what else was next on the list. Get first name, get last name. Get email, which returns the student's email address derived from their name, e.g. michael.palin@uq.net. Always assume it's this. Okay, cool. Just gonna give me a bit of space to work with here. Cool. Now, what have we got? What was it? Get email? Can't find it. Get email. Okay, self, whose email? It's gonna sound repetitive, but you know, this self concept is kind of hard to get your head around, so I'm gonna keep drilling it in. Now, we've done a lot of string sort of concatenating, right, with this plus sign. I'm actually going to show you guys what I think is generally a better way if you've got something slightly more complicated. So this is a bit of a schlep to set up, right? It's going to be a whole bunch of plus signs and dots and @UQs, and it's just going to be terrible. So I'm going to show you guys the dot format method for a string if you haven't seen that before. So let's I set up a function without giving it anything. Cool. So let's actually have a look at the help stir.format. Return a formatted version of S using substitutions from here. Cool. Substitutions are identified by braces. So that's sort of a bit cryptic. So let's just look at an example. If I have a string and I want to say something is cooler than something, right? I'm using these curly braces here. And now I can call dot format. And what dot format does is, cool, it's going to go, cool, the first set of braces I'm going to replace with the first variable you give me here, or the first thing you give me here, and the second set of braces with the second thing you give me here. So Rudi is cooler than, I've set myself up for something terrible here. Rudi is cooler than other Rudi. Oh, geez, I panicked, right? But what you can, actually, that was a terrible example. You know what, let's put a different word in here just for the sake of, there we go. So it replaced the first one with Rudi, and the second set of braces with Apple, right? I don't think well on the spot, apparently. I probably should have planned this out a bit more. But what we can see is that's how that dot format method is working. So this can actually be really useful for setting up when we want to do something like this, right? Where we're going to have this first name and then some sort of text and then last name and then some text, right? Because let's have a look at the generic structure of the thing we want to be returning. Remember, set up a string. So what's it? It's the first name. Then it's a dot, then it's the last name, then it's, what's it, @uq.net.au. Okay, now we want to format that. And so what's the thing we want to give back here? We want to give it our first name. So how do we access our first name? Well, we're within the class, so let's just use our self._ first name. And what's our last name? Self._ last name. And that's what we're going to be returning back. So hopefully it'll replace this brace with first name and replace this brace with our last name. And let's see if we can get Fred's email address out. Fred.get email. Oh, cool. So it's almost right. We can see we've got these ugly capital letters here though, and that's not exactly what we wanted. So we're actually going to have to do a bit more work here before we can get to that. So we want to make sure that all our capitals are, all our capitals are gone when we come down here. So let's actually set up something else. Let's set up a local variable using our first name, except we want to make sure that they're all lowercase letters, right? And Python actually has a string method for this, dot lower. Okay, Let's do the same thing with our last name. So grab our last name from the init and lowerify it. And this actually works out really nicely because now my dot format is going to fit on the line, which is looking clean. I had an extra bracket accidentally. Whoops. Let's try that again. Where's Fred gone? Fred, get your email. Awesome. fred.weasley@uq.net.au. Cool. Now, here one or two of you guys probably sitting there going like, oh, but Rudi, why did you use self._firstname instead of calling the get name method? Okay. Now, they're both perfectly acceptable here. One way you can sort of think about this is when we're designing the class, when we're setting it up for use, we can use these guys inside the class because they're our variables, right? We're setting this up. We want to use these private variables to make our lives easier, right? The sort of get name, get student number is for outside the class, right? Once people get outside the class, we don't want them playing around with the internals of our class, right? We just want them to go, this is how you use it, use these methods, and they'll sort you out for everything you need. And so we hand them this get name, this get degree, and then they work it out that way. So when we're inside our class, perfectly acceptable to use these guys. Okay, perfectly good class design, as long as we're inside our class like this. Let's go back. Right, __ stir method. Okay. __ stir. Self. Okay. Now what this guy does, so returns a string with the student's name, email, degree in a format such as this. Okay, well, this is looking just like our our previous example, right? We want to give back some sort of string that's been really formatted. So I'm going to use string.format. Surprise, surprise. So what do we want? We want the first name and the... Oh, well, this Michael Palin, this actually looks a lot like a get name. So actually, instead of rewriting this code, I'm just going to use .get name this time. So I'm going to use a single pair of braces for that. Then where are we? What do we want? Then we want a space, then a bracket, then what looks like our email address. So we just wrote that function. So let's use a pair of brackets for that. Then a comma, then some sort of our student number, then a comma, then our degree, then a bracket. Okay, so this first guy is the name. So we can use our get name function, self.getName. It's nice when we can reuse our code this way. What's the second thing we want it to be? The email address. So self.getEmail, we just wrote that one as well. Note what I'm doing here as well is I don't want to run off the page. So I'm actually, after I put in the comma, I'm actually entering down so we can stack everything. It'll look really neat and it'll keep stuff on the page. I'd put a dash there as well. The third thing is our student number. So that was self._snum, I believe is what we... Yep, snum. And the final thing we've got here was the degree. So that was self._degree. Notice out here I've used a method. Oops. .getEmail. Here I've used two methods to get the information back. That's just so that we don't have to repeat all this code. Whereas here, since we're just putting the number straight in, we can just put in the variable. And we want to return that. Okay, cool. Let's see how that's going. Fred, awesome. Fred dot __ stir __ brackets. Fred Weasley, Fred.Weasley, and student number B. Okay, cool. So awesome. So that's working, right? Now you might be thinking, well, this is a bit of a weird thing to call a function, right? This is actually a built-in to Python, right? It's setting the toString method for the Fred class. Now, if you remember before, right, when we typed in Fred, well, let's just type in Fred, right? The lowercase Fred. It gives us back this jumbly mess of a thing here, right? Now, if I comment out this function for a second, whoops, let's reload that. Let's grab Fred, right? And let's try and say we wanted to convert Fred into a string. We get this ugly thing back here, right? Which doesn't really help us. So what this particular __ string method does is if we set up a Fred and now we try and stirify Fred or stringify, we actually get back what we set in the string method. So by default, the string method is just some random main student, it's unhelpful, right? It's a memory address. We don't really want that. It doesn't really tell us what Fred is. So if we write our own stringify, we can go, cool, whenever you're supposed to turn Fred into a string, do this. And that's really helpful. Similarly, when we just type Fred, right, we get this weird junk back. That's actually what the next one is here. Now the repr method, right? Now that stands for represent. Okay, and it does the exact same thing, but for when we just enter the variable. Like, what do we want it to look like? So what do we want it to look like? Repr, which returns a string which looks like the Python code to create the object. Okay, so when we created Fred, we put student and then we passed in the things we wanted. So let's do that again. So again, we're going to use a string.format. So we write student and then an open bracket, and then we want the name. So we put a pair of braces there. Then we want a comma, then a space, then the student number, and then the degree. So very similar to the previous one, and then the close brace as well. Cool. So the first thing we were giving it was the name. So let's call our .getName method. .getName, yep. Exact same as the previous question. And then we had the student number, snum. And then that last thing was the degree as well. Okay, so just passing all those guys in again. Cool. And now let's try getting our Fred back. So there's Fred. Once again, we can stir Fred. Or now, if we just look at Fred, we should get something a bit nicer. Cool, and we get the way of constructing Fred, right? Student, Fred, yada yada. Cool. Let's actually have a quick look back at that, because if I recall, they wanted us to, they wanted us to actually explicitly put quotes here. Okay. So, one way we could do this is we can, these double quotes and single quotes are fairly interchangeable in Python, right? So if we use double quotes on the outside, we could wrap these guys in quotes, right? Whereas if I try to keep these on the outside, see how it's going in and out of the string here, like we've lost our colors. So we want to use these double quotes for the outside, then we can use single quotes on the inside, right? So let's try that again. Fred. And let's just putting in Fred. Cool, see now we've got these little quotes in how they wanted it. There are other ways of approaching that problem. .format has some sort of more useful stuff you can pass inside these braces. I'm not going to go into that at the moment. Where did my website go? There we go. But that's one way of getting around that problem though. And setting up a stir method and a repr method is really useful for classes, particularly repr method is really useful when you're debugging, right? Because you want to go, I don't know what this class is or what it looks like. Well, let's just give it a repr method, put it into the console, see what it looks like. Really useful with debugging. I highly encourage you guys to write a repr method whenever you're trying to debug a class. That's what we got here now. Let's see validity checking. Is important, yada yada. Make sure you write check students. Write a function check students which takes a list of students and returns true if they all have different student numbers. Okay? Now, make sure you write as a function, not a method. So these guys here are all within the class, right? This is a method. We want this to be a function, right? So we want to say, cool, we're done with the class. Now we're writing some functions. Right, so now I'm going to go back out to the global, to the flush left, if you will. And we're going to write a check students function, which takes a list of students. Cool, what's this guy do? Returns true if they all have different student numbers, and false if there are student numbers that have been repeated. Okay, well, straight up, this sounds like something where we're going to have to look at all the students, right? So I'm going to set up a for loop. For student in students. Now, what do we want to do? We want to return true if they all have different student numbers, and return false if there are student numbers that have been repeated. Okay, well, how do we access the student number of this particular student? We wrote a function for that, right? I mean, a method, excuse me, get student num. So calling this gives us the student number of the particular student we're looking at. So what we need to do is somehow keep track of all the student numbers we've found so far. Okay, well, that doesn't seem too bad actually. Let's set up something to keep track of that. So seen, numbers we've seen so far. And let's just use a list for this, or a dictionary. We could use a list or a dictionary. I'm just gonna use a list in this case because we're just keeping track of the number. So for student in students, well, this will give us the number, right? So let's set up a little local variable. So basically, every time we go through the loop, snum, grab the student number of the student we're looking at. Okay, cool. Now, what do we want? We want to say, well, if they all have false if there are student numbers that have been repeated. So what we want to know basically is if snum is in seen, right? Because seen is going to keep track of all the student numbers we found so far, right? So we just basically want to go, cool, if snum in seen, then we know that we found a duplicate, right? So our function should return false. Okay, cool. Now, if it wasn't a duplicate, right, we wanna actually fill this scene, right? Because we want to know, we want scene to contain every snum that we found. So let's just append a list method. Classes are fun, yeah. Scene.append snum, right? So now we're building up a list of numbers that we've seen before. So the next time we come through, maybe now it'll be in scene if we get the same guy. Okay, cool. Now, I know a lot of you are probably want to do something like this. Else return true, right? Well, it wasn't seen, so we should return true. No, right? This is the similar problem we've been having for the last couple of shoots. How many people do we have to check before we can definitively say that that none of them have the same S number, right? We can't check 99 out of 100, right? We can't check 1 or 2. We have to check every single one because the very last person could be the duplicate, right? So there's no way we can possibly know that there are no duplicates until we fall out the bottom of our loop. Now that being said, once we do fall out the bottom of our loop, we know that we must have hit the end, right? We know we must have had all good people because we didn't hit any bad ones and we're out of students now. So it must be true. Okay, so let's just break this down again. We've got a scene list keeping track of everyone. We're looping across every student. We're getting their S number out. We're going, have we seen this guy before? If we have, false. Versus, well, otherwise, we wanna append this. I forgot to turn off my Facebook notifications again. I'm gonna have to blur that. I'll get the hang of this one day. We want to append that. And if we run out of students to check, we must return true. We must be good. Hold up, recording. Cool. So yeah, so that's the general logic we've got going there. Let's boot up our shell. Let's actually move this guy over to the right and try with some of the test cases we've got here. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Get out of here. Okay. Students 1. Where'd my shell go? Okay. Cool, and then we're going to try running check students. Notice since it's just a global function, we don't have to use .check students. Cool, true. And let's check on this guy. So what have we got here? This guy, we've got 2 student numbers that are both 2. So this time it should hopefully return false. Awesome. So we found the second student number that was a duplicate. And we'll get back to that afterwards. Okay, so let's just... Cool, let's move on to the next thing. Adding courses. Write a class which represents a university course. Cool. So how do we set up a class? With the class keyword, which has a lowercase c, right? So let's just have a look here. Class, name of the thing we want, what type of thing it is. So we're just going to make another object, right? But what do we have? We want to make a course. That is an object. Okay. Now, this here is where you'd put your doc string, right? So just a quick, you know, a course for uni. I'm going to be really vague, really quick with my doc strings, right? Because I just want to work through the actual solutions. But you guys need to be really pedantic with your doc strings. Because, you know, double standards. So what do we always need an init method, right? Because we want to be able to make, a course. Again, always pass in that self variable because we want to keep track of the individual course. Now, what does a course have? It has a course code and it has a course name. Okay, so let's see when they make a course. Yep, they're giving it a code and they're giving it a course name. So the first thing we want to give it is a code, and the second thing we want to give it is a course name. Okay, now we don't just want to throw those guys away, so let's get to storing those. Store them in our particular instance of the course. So we wanted to know which course has which code and name. And awesome, that should be good for now. So what are we doing here? We need to have a getter method for the course code and the course name. Okay, so setting up our getter methods. Get name. Oh, I almost did that, right? But then it wouldn't know which one I was talking about. So we need to pass in self. Which course's name are we getting? And then return self._name, right? This is all very common practice, right? And that's why I'm sort of just brushing through it a bit quickly now, because it's all these get methods are just cool. Return the variable that we're talking about, right? So we're gonna do the same thing, exactly the same thing here with the get code. Just return that self.code guy. Okay, cool. So this is sort of like setting up the basic roots for our class, right? This is almost what we started with the student class. So let's actually just make a new one. Little course is a course. CSSE1001. Coding stuff. Cool, we made our course object. Now we should be able to use .getName on it. Cool, we got our coding stuff, and get code should hopefully give us CSSE1001. Sweet. So all our initial skeleton is set up. Let's go back and have a look at this. What else have we got? Add functionality to the student class so that each instance is capable of recording the courses for which a student has obtained a grade. Okay. You should write the following methods in the student class. Okay, so let's just go back up here. Add course. Okay, I'm actually going to put these down here. Add course. There's no particular reason for that. I personally just like having all my underscore stuff at the bottom. That's just me. There's no real reason to put them in any particular order like that. So what's it taking? It's taking a course and a grade. So what are we doing? Which sets the student's grade for a given course. If the student already has a grade for that course, then replace the old grade with the new one. Okay, so obviously we're going to need something inside our actual student object that's keeping track of these courses. Now, since we can have multiple courses, and what do we have here? Every course has a grade that they got for it, right? So they're going to have CSSE, or CSSE1001, they got a 4, Deco 1800, they got a 5, CSSE1001, they got a 6, right? So it looks like we want to have this this grouping of courses where they all map to a grade, okay? Now, the moment I say the word map, your ears should prick up at that, right? What sort of collection type thing do we have that provides a mapping? And that's a dictionary, right? And check out last week's video if you're unsure on how to use a dictionary. So let's set up the courses, right? Set up courses. So let's actually just call that self._courses, right? And we want it to be a dictionary. So we use the curly braces. Could also do this, set up a dictionary, but I just prefer to use the curly braces. Okay. So now because when we set up a student, right, we don't initially have any courses that they've done, right? We set them up and then we'll add the courses later using this add course method. So that being said, now when we have our add course method, right, it's a fairly straightforward process. We just want to add the course and the grade into our dictionary. Okay, so we would want the course to be the key, right? Because we don't want it to be like, we don't want the grade to be the key, right? Because what if we have several things where they got a 4? Then we wouldn't know which course we were talking about, right? We want to go, well, what grade did he get for with this course? Okay, so remember the dictionary notation, right? Was if we have a dictionary, we then go key and assign it the value we want. Okay, so in this case, our dictionary self._courses. The key is the course, and the value is the grade. Right? And that's all there is to it. We're just adding to our courses dictionary. So let's just quickly have a go at that. Course. Actually, I already wrote a course before, didn't I? Cool, course. And if I set up Fred again, let's just, if I set up Fred to be that. Now if I go Fred dot add course, probably should have given that a better name, oh well. Let's give him a 4. Cool. Now if we were to have a quick sort of cheat of what's in courses now. Well, that's not very helpful, is it? I guess we'll come back to that when we can actually have a better look at what our self._courses is. Oh, actually, no, what am I saying? Oh, cool, sorry, this is actually our dictionary. Oh, I am blind. So we can see that it's got our course object as the key, right? We didn't write a repr method for course, so that's why it looks freaking terrible. But we can see it's mapping to 4. So that's actually working well for us. We just need to, we would have to write a repr method if we wanted that to look nice. And let's actually do that. I'm actually going to do that real quickly. __ repr self. Now I would just want it to give me the code personally. So that's just what I'm going to do here. Let's just return the code. A bit cheap perhaps, but I think that's the easiest way of doing it, just so we can make this example work. So let's set up our course. Let's add Fred. Let's add our course to Fred. And now if we have a look at Fred.courses, awesome, right? See, we used our repr method. So instead of giving us back this big ugly main course, yada yada, it just gave us back the code and a mapping. Much nicer, much nicer. GPA, write a method GPA for student. Oh boy. GPA for student, which returns the student's GPA, the average of all their grades. You may assume that each course carries the same weight. Well, that makes it a lot easier. Okay. So what do we have to do? We need to sum up all the grades we've got and divide it by the number of grades, right? That's just our average formula, right? So, you know, the mean is equal to the sum divided by the number of things. That's our sort of general formula here. Now you'll actually see that sum's gone purple. And that's because sum is actually a built into Python, which I'm actually going to use right here because it makes life a lot easier. Now what sum does is sum adds up all the things in a list. Or in a collection. I've put in some invalid syntax. Let's just get into our shell though. Okay, so if I have a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's just assign that. Oh, I can write X, right? And I go sum X, it's actually added them all up for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. Okay, so that's honestly really nice. That's pretty much exactly what we want to be using here to get our GPA method going, right? Oh, excuse me. The other thing, so basically we need to get all the values out of our dictionary, right? Because we have our dictionary, all the keys are courses, all the values are the numbers, right? So if we have a dictionary, let's just go back over the shell as well, right? Let's just set up a dictionary. A, we got a 1 in A, flunked A pretty hard. We nailed B, we got a 7, and then C we got a 4, say, right? If we want to get all these 1, 7, 4 out, these are the values, right? And there's actually a really good method for dictionaries that's just dot values, which will just give us back all the values. Okay, so it gives us a slightly weird looking thing, but it's basically a list, 1, 4, 7. There's all our values. So what we want to be doing here is, well, we want to be adding up all those values and dividing it by how many values there are, right? Because that's our mean formula. So if we were to sum this x dot values, right, we can see that's adding up all the stuff we need. Okay, so let's go back to GPA. We have self._courses dot values, right? That's giving us back all our grades, right? Because we accessed our dictionary, and then our dictionary, we only want the values of our dictionary, right? Because that's where our grades are. So let's go back over here. Grades, set up our grades this way. Now, what we would want to do is we would want to take the sum of grades, right? Because that'll give us the total score. And then we want to divide it by how many grades there are. So how do we know how many grades there are? Well, another way of saying that is just how long is grades. Okay? And we can just give that back. Return sum grades, len grades. Now, there is one issue here, right? If we haven't added any courses, this len grades is actually going to be 0, isn't it? We're gonna be dividing by 0. So let's quickly put in a bit of protector code about that, right? If self._courses, or if let's just go if not self._courses, right? Then what would our GPA be? Well, if we haven't done any courses, our GPA is nothing, right? But if we have done courses, then we would want to use this approach, right? So this is just checking against the divide by 0 error we might get if we don't check if courses is empty first, right? That's all this if not's doing, is if not courses. So this would return no or false if there's nothing in it. So if not, then means we come into here. Okay, let's have a quick example. Let's set a course. Let's set another course. I'm going to be really terrible and call this course 2. Terrible variable names, but beggars can't be choosers. Let's set up Fred again. Let's add a course to Fred and say he got a 4 in that. Let's add course 2 to Fred and say he got a 6 in that, right? So hopefully Fred should have with 2 courses of 4 and a 6, Fred should have a GPA of 5. Sweet. So our sum and averaging formula has worked perfectly. So that's great. Now let's quickly just make another student, just to check that 0 thing I was talking about. Okay, so now if we go check George dot, let's check his courses first, right? Look, he's got an empty dictionary, right? So he has 0 courses done. So if we go to GPA, cool, it's now giving us back 0, right? Before, if we hadn't put this in, it would have actually given us a divide by 0 error. So always good to think about these edge cases and try and make your code a bit more robust, is what we call it, right? When it doesn't break for what would probably be a perfectly valid input, right? If he hasn't done any courses yet, someone accidentally calls the GPA method, right? We don't want our code to just like shit itself. We want it to return something nice and something sensible, in this case 0. Okay. Okay, cool. And that's actually the end of our shoot here. Overwrite the old grade. Oh, that's true actually. I didn't think about that. If we add a course to Fred, right? So Fred, yeah, I'm gonna restart this shell. Let's just restart this. Let's set up Fred. Whoops. Let's set up Fred. Okay. Now, if we add a course to Fred, CSSE1001 coding stuff, and we add this course to Fred, we say he got a 4 in the course, right? Now Fred has a stored 4 for CSSE1001. Now what we were actually supposed to do here is we were supposed to make it so that we override it if you use 1001 again. Now since we used a dictionary, right? I didn't even think about this, but since we used a dictionary, dictionaries don't allow duplicate keys, right? So if I use course 6 now, what this is actually going to do is since this is the same key as before, it's actually going to override our value in the dictionary. Fred._courses. See, it's been replaced with a 6 because it basically went, oh, you've already got that key in here, so I'm just going to update the value to be 6. So see, by using a dictionary, we actually completely worked around that problem without even having to realize it was in the chute. My bad, but my good. And yeah, that's all we've got here in this week's tutorial. We'll definitely be getting into some more class stuff next week as well, and this is definitely the brunt of your assignment. So really try and get in and understand these self concepts, these underscore sort of functions here, like the stir and the repper that are a bit special. But the main thing I'd say is to get your head around is this self stuff for now. Like, we need to know which instance of student we're talking about, right? Student, again, is just a design, it's just a blueprint. We need to know which particular student we're talking about, so we pass this self variable around everywhere. Okay? Other things to take out are dot format. Dot format is a beautiful method for whenever we need to spit out something sticking more than 2 strings together, really. Dot format is probably the nicest way of doing it. And yeah, cool. So I think that's all we got for now. You might have noticed the audio quality is a bit better. I got a new mic. So hopefully I've set up the settings all right and this has been usable recording. I'm going to be really sad if I have to do this again. But yeah, otherwise just, leave any comments here. Post on Piazza if you've got any questions about this. And I'll hopefully see you guys next week. Cool.